Okay, welcome to this episode of Future Insight Podcast. I'm Dean Cantu, and I'm thrilled to have you with us as we explore the ideas, innovations, and emerging trends in shaping tomorrow's world. Whether you're tuning in from home or on the go or during a break in your day, we're glad you chose to spend the time with us. Today, we're excited to welcome our guests to the show, experts and thought leaders whose perspectives will help us dig deeper into innovations and breakthroughs driving the future. So our guests today are Dr. Leanne Gray, Associate Professor and Lead for Initial Teacher Training at Anglia Ruskin University in Chelmsford, England. And our other guest is Ms. Jenny Fogarty, Associate Professor and Director of Initial Teacher Training at Anglia Ruskin University as well. So thank you both for joining us for the Future Insight Podcast, this episode. And before we begin, again, I always ask our guests to provide us with some insight into your professional journey that's brought each of you to your respective positions today. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Dean. It's great for us to be here. Thank you so much for inviting us. My name's Jenny, as it said, Jenny Fogarty. I'm the Director of Initial Teacher Training at Anglia Ruskin. We shorten that to ARU. We've got 3 campuses in England, one in Chelmsford, which is in Essex, the east of England, one in Cambridge, which you'll be familiar. There's another university in Cambridge as well, and also in Peterborough, which is about 50 miles from Cambridge, slightly more in the Midlands. So we cover a patch of about 6,000 square miles, and Leanne will talk a little bit more about her context in Essex. But before I took this role on, I am a teacher by background, so I've had a 20-year career in education. I started off at training to be a primary school teacher, what you'd call an elementary school teacher, and moved quite quickly up the ranks in terms of leadership roles. So I became a deputy head and then acting head teacher for 2 headships. And then I took a move about 10 years ago into teacher education, so into academia. I did my master's at the University of Cambridge and just fell in love with research and fell in love with the opportunities that higher education had given me and wanted to do more of that. So in the last 10 years, I've been really lucky to have some great opportunities through working in higher education. I've taught in prisons regularly. I've taught internationally. I'm really passionate about not only widening participation into the university, but making sure that when young people and older people get there, that they are successful. And that's really where I have a kind of kindred spirit in my colleague Leanne. We're both really passionate about students making a flying start to university so that they can be successful throughout their time with us. So my current role is as Director of Initial Teacher Training. So what that means is I'm responsible for all our programs at Anglia Ruskin University that award qualified teacher status. And in the UK, about 4 years ago now, there was a big shake-up of all the universities and school-based providers that could train teachers, and you had to be re-accredited by the government. And our university was the only new university in the country to be awarded. So we have been doing this work as kind of pioneers in the sector. We've written the first new Bachelors of Education, which awards qualified teacher status for 30 years. And that's been a passion project that Leanne and I have been on for the last 3 years or so. And now we have trainees going into schools and doing amazing things. And it's wonderful to see it come to life. So yeah, that's me. That's where I'm at. And Leanne will share a little bit about her journey.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. Hi, Dean. Thank you for having us. So like Jenny, I'm a primary school teacher by background. I trained at the University of Birmingham, but then quickly moved to London and taught in a range of London boroughs in quite challenging contexts, and found that I really enjoyed working with children from disadvantaged backgrounds and making that impact and difference to their lives. I was a classroom teacher, then a deputy and a head teacher for about 16 years altogether before transfer. I studied an Ed.D. whilst as a deputy head teacher, and really enjoyed the research aspect of that role, of that course, and having the space to think and reflect on my practice as a deputy head through the Ed.D. Was a really enjoyable process. So about 5.5 years ago, I saw a job at ARU, and at that point I was a head teacher and decided to make the move into the higher education sector. So began working on an early childhood studies degree here at ARU. But then when ARU was accredited with the teacher training awarding powers, I moved across to the ITT team, and I've been here for 3 years now, working with Jenny and some other colleagues in Chelmsford, building that course in the Essex region in particular. And one of my other jobs, apart from leading the team in Chelmsford, is I'm strategic lead for mentoring. So I oversee all of the school mentoring and lead mentoring across the Eastern region for ARU. And I've done quite a few bits of research in that field as well. And I think that's my short history.
Okay, great. Thank you both. And I know that you bring a lot of experience to your current positions there at ARU. And you talked a little bit, you mentioned about they were reaccredited for training of teachers. Could you give a little bit of insight to our leaders as to what the genesis was of that initiative and what the qualifications are to get that reaccreditation?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. It was a very contentious piece of government policy, and quite a lot has been written about it because there were about 20% of providers in the country who were not reaccredited, so they lost their awarding powers. And we're talking about, universities with very long histories of delivering teacher training: University of Durham, University of Cumbria, University of East Anglia, lots of big universities. And it was a very government driven process. It was submitting a bid which outlined how you would meet the government requirements, drilling down right into some very specifics of the classroom. That we pride ourselves on having a kind of academic freedom, and we had to get that signed off by the Department for Education. So they wanted to know PowerPoint slides, teaching outlines, how you would meet the core curriculum framework. So that's the kind of framework for teacher training. And over the years, we've very much been left to our own devices in terms of interpretation, but always a high accountability framework. We have Ofsted, which is our inspection and governance framework, which is very prevalent in the UK and in England and Wales, particularly inspects schools, early years settings, colleges, and initial teacher training. So we've always had that. So it was quite a surprise when the government chose, in the middle of a global pandemic, to decide who got to do their jobs. Essentially, it was a big deal. And ARU had always worked in partnership with local providers, providing the academic award and the schools providing the qualified teacher status, but they wanted to bring back the Bachelors of Education. And Leanne and I both feel very strongly about, particularly for primary teachers, this idea of kind of low and slow teacher education being really important. There's a big trend in the UK for very fast-paced teacher training. The quicker you can get them in, the quicker you can get them into the classrooms. But we have a significant recruitment and retention crisis. We can't train teachers fast enough as they're leaving the profession. Right. So we're really hoping that what we've done at ARU will be a kind of proof of concept, and 87% of our students can walk to their local campus, so they're hyper local. They live right in those communities that they'll be serving as teachers. And so we're really hoping that when we can track them in 5-10 years, they're still teaching in the profession and they're still serving those communities, because it seems to us that if we can ground their teacher training in their locality, they're much more likely then to be able to make a contribution and want to stay in the profession, because they'll have invested so much, and their partners, our partners, the schools, have also invested in them. So it's multifaceted. Teacher training is complex in the UK. There's lots of different ways you can train to be a teacher. It's a degree profession. You have to have a degree and you have to have qualified teacher status. And what we do is combine those two things. So we have the degree, the 3-year degree, and the qualified teacher status in one 3-year program that's very intense and demands a lot of our trainee teachers, but they're really rising to the challenge, which is fantastic. But we are doing something different, because most people are running 1-year courses, quickly in, quickly out, and we're definitely doing something different.
Excellent. One of the questions I had within your teacher preparation program deals with the culminating experience. It's called different things. Student teaching, internship, residency, apprenticeship. So I'm at the University of Arkansas Fort Smith, and we had educators, teacher educators across the state, as well as from Pennsylvania and Colorado, met actually at Oxford a few weeks ago for a convening, and we were looking at specifically at apprenticeships. But what is the culminating experience for those that go through your teacher preparation program in that last semester or year?
Yeah, so it doesn't work necessarily, and Leanne might want to come in a bit about this. There's a whole raft of requirements they have to do within their programme, and then we recommend them to the government based on our judgment as to whether we believe they have met the requirements, and then we are inspected on the quality of what we're providing in terms of those requirements. So, for example, they have to do 120 days in school. They have to be assessed on placement. We call it placement. We do 3 8-week placements over a 3-year program, but they have to do 120 days in school regardless of the route that they train to teach in. So if they do a 1-year course, apprenticeship, a BEd, they have to do 120 days as a minimum. There are other requirements as well. They have to have experience in 2 age phases. So our program is a 5 to 11 phase. So Key Stage 1 in England is 5 to 7, and then we have 7 to 11. So they couldn't just train with 1-year group, for example. So if we have colleagues that train teachers on work-based routes, so they're employed as unqualified teachers, that can be quite challenging because they'll be given a classroom, but in this example they have to have an experience in another key stage. So there are all sorts of different requirements in terms of what curriculum we teach them. We've just come to the end this week of a very exciting and immersive experience called intensive training and practice, and again that's a requirement that all providers have. Leanne, I didn't know if you wanted to come in there and talk a little bit about what ITAP is.
Yeah, so intensive training and practice is an opportunity for the trainees to really focus in on a key specific area or aspect of teacher training. Different university and teacher training providers have interpreted it slightly differently. At ARU, we are doing week-long blocks of ITAP. So this week, the trainees have spent 2 mornings in school, seeing what's happening in schools, and then they've spent the rest of the time on campus practicing the skills that they've seen in schools. So they've been looking at this week, they've been focusing on behaviour and how teachers embed routines in the classroom, and then they've been practicing that on campus. So yesterday we had trainees outside practicing lining each other up like they would do with a group of children, because these are all skills that teachers have, but sometimes I think in teacher training we haven't focused enough on how teachers do line a group of children up. How do you line a group of 5-year-olds up with minimal fuss and without wasting too much time? So they've had a chance to practice that this week, and it's been a very immersive experience. The trainees have enjoyed it. I think it's been quite tiring for them. They found it, as it is intense, and it's been the first time our first year trainees have been out into schools as well. So they've had that opportunity to visit a local primary school and spend some time with their peer group, watching what does happen in an actual school. Yeah.
And we have to demonstrate that they've had an opportunity for 30 days of that over their course. So again, that's part of the requirements. There's different benchmarks that we have to hit. We track attendance very closely. So they have to have attended, they have to have passed their modules, they have to have been assessed teaching by their final practice. They have to have done at least 6 weeks with teaching 80% of a working week. So there's certain benchmarks that we have to hit, and that's how we then will convene a group at ARU and we'll make our recommendations to the government and say, can they be awarded qualified teacher status? So that's how we do it, and other providers will have different processes, but we all have the same criteria that we've got to achieve.
Excellent. Yeah, I appreciate that insight into the teacher preparation programs in England, and it seems like ARU is one of the leaders out there in what you're doing. In fact, I know that both of you have published articles and have presented on this topic. I know a couple of the more recent articles. One of them was titled "A Modern Twist on an Old Classic: Innovative and Transformative Pedagogy for New Trainees," and then you had another one, "Keeping Us Warm: Trainee Teacher Perspectives on School and University Transition." So, if you could touch on both of those topics, both with respect to that school to university transition, which is a particular interest to our listeners, but just also some of the yeah, I love the title that you've got, Modern Twist on an Old Classic, because as we all know in education, it's continuity and change. My area is history, social studies, ed, and there's a work by a researcher now that in the latter part of the 20th century, Larry Caban, where he traced the history of social studies, history of social studies in the United States, and that was his title. You know, it was continuity and change, and we see that, and I presume it's very similar in England too. So if you could talk a little bit about both of those things relative to the teacher preparation program, sort of continuity and change, as well as this school to university transition.
Yeah, I'll pick up about the program, and then Leanne might want to come in about the transition piece that we worked on. So you're right, Dean. You know, everything in education is cyclical. It goes depending on the government of the day for us in England, but particularly whether it's local decision making, it's national decision making. We see phases, and it's so interesting now to talk to our trainees who are out and about in schools, and we see things and we say, well, yeah, we were doing that when we were a trainee teacher 20 years ago, but it might have gone out of fashion and come back in. Whereas for us, we wanted to do something different. If we were going to be the only new university coming into the sector in 2024, we had an 18-month window to really decide how we would design teacher training. And, you know, for me as director, and Leanne was my first appointment as lead for ITT, what a gift that has been for us to shape a new offer. And, you know, it's very rare in higher education, someone gives you a blank piece of paper and says, off you go, how are you going to make this work? And it was very exciting. Obviously, innovation is painful as well. So we decided to look back to what has gone before and look at what has worked well, and also talk to colleagues and talk to head teachers. And for primary teaching, everybody said to us, why don't they do a BEd anymore? Why don't they do a Bachelor's of Education? Why is it all these 1-year programs? Where have the 3 or 4 year programs gone that can train teachers? And the reality in modern HE in the UK is that they've gone because they're too expensive. It's too expensive to combine the 3-year program and the teacher training all in one, because when you work with very young trainees, young students, which is what these courses typically attract, you know, they come with lots of complex challenges. They need all the support that you would put in place for a regular undergraduate bachelor's degree, and the expectations are sky high for them going in and forming a professional identity when they've only just left school. You know, they're in this really liminal space between childhood and adulthood, and we're saying to them, and you've got to be responsible for other people's children. So that requires a lot of resource to put it in. But what we know is, in the data tells us this, so about 5,000 people a year in England train to be a teacher this way, compared with nearly 25,000 people that train on a postgraduate 1-year route. But we know that they are more likely to stay in the profession. And so our research, when we talked about an old twist on a modern classic, was really about going back to basics. We've taken our curriculum from Bruner's work of the spiral curriculum. You know, you don't get any more seminal than revisiting at greater depth and breadth every year, and just stripped away some of what I call the university nonsense. You know, this isn't about us coming up with exciting module titles and breaking our courses down into teeny weeny chunks. This is about how can our students understand and navigate the university processes. So we have, you know, 4 core modules a year: placement, core curriculum, so their English, maths and science, their wider curriculum, their art, their music, their humanities, and then key professional skills, so the skills you need to be a teacher. And we repeat those every year for 3 years, and we call them placement 1, placement 2 and placement 3. And it's very easy for people to understand what it is that we're doing. And every time we have to make a decision, Leanne and I are very good at saying to each other, we can design this however we want. So let's take a step back and make it as simple to understand for the partners that we work in with, new entrants to the profession, our team, because sometimes we can get so in our heads at university that we start speaking another language that people don't even understand. And it's about really breaking down some of these barriers to say, let's have a really clear framework for what teacher training looks like at ARU, but let's do it to an excellent standard. Let's try and be world leading in this space and go back to basics without having to compromise. So what does excellence in delivery look like? What does excellence in partnership look like? And what does excellence in outcomes look like? And every decision we make is grounded by those three criteria. It's about excellence, and we can hold ourselves to that high standard, and we can hold our trainees and we can hold our partners. But we really wanted an opportunity with this old classic to put the modern twists on it, to make sure we've got simulation-based learning embedded in the curriculum, to make sure that the content we're teaching represents a post-pandemic school and education landscape, because it's very different, and the challenges that our colleagues in schools are facing, whether that be attendance, whatever it is, around working with families and the challenges they have working with families, we wanted that to be embedded in the curriculum. And also, obviously, we have to meet the requirements, and the requirements have changed. That was part of the accreditation process, so we wanted to make sure that we were always kind of on the front foot, and that we gave enough space in our curriculum so that if we get another change of government again, which we have done through this process, so we have a new Labour government in 2024, that was not the government who made all these changes that we've had to adopt, that, you know, we've got a new curriculum review that's just come out last week. There will be some changes to the national curriculum, and we're going to have to adapt and change and flex our curriculum for that. But keeping those core principles, going back to Bruna's work, thinking about what a really good spiral curriculum looks like so that trainees feel confident as they're building up their competence, has been really important to us. And managing that transition from school to university in order for them to access this really intense course and programme has been vital. And that's where our second piece of research that we've done together and what we presented in Chicago this year, which was a real delight for us, has come from. So Leanne, do you want to chat a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we know that time transition between school and college and university is can be a difficult one for our trainees, and we also have trainees that come from a lot of different types of courses. So some have done what we call A levels, which are more sort of, you do 3 subjects in a lot of depth and detail in a more of an academic style. Some of our trainees have done T levels, which are a more practical course. So they have a lot of school-based experience in their sort of 16 to 18-year-old course, the course that they've done at that age. So our trainees are coming from a lot of different pre-university experiences, and we know that that transition can be difficult. So we wanted to look at what we could do to support that transition, and then think about the impact of the things that we put into place. So we did have 4 activities that our trainees took part in before they joined university. So we had face-to-face meetings with them on campus. We had online webinars. We had phone calls where we would phone the trainees and congratulate them on getting on the course, but also offer them personalised support with certain things that were coming up. And then we had a welcome pack, which was an online resource which had activities for the trainees to complete before they joined the university. So they all took part in these activities, and then once they had started at the university, we asked them for some feedback on each of those 4 tasks. And there was a range of engagement with the tasks. Some were more popular than others, but we found that the trainees wanted 4 different things out of those activities. They wanted our emotional support, both from us as a university, but also from their peer group. They wanted to start building relationships, both with, again, the staff at the university and also their peers. They liked personalised approaches to transition. So they liked personalised phone calls from us as an ITT team. They didn't really like phone calls from the wider university where they didn't know their individual context and concerns. And they also wanted us to help them to feel prepared for university. So, things like being prepared academically, things like, where is the library? Where do I get my card on the first day? Where do I need to go? All that sort of, those things that give them anxiety before they transition to university. So I think those were the main things that came out of the research. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add, Jenny, there.
No, that really covered it. And I suppose it's helpful to say for the audience, that we did this kind of outside the usual university processes. So the big machine of the university was doing lots of work over the summer, but our trainees have to have an interview with us, and their places on the course are capped. It's a very competitive course, and so we have quite a long lead in with them before they come to us, and they're waiting on exam results, and that can create quite a lot of anxiety, and we wanted to find ways to smooth that for them. And also for them to remain connected to us. You know, if they've been interviewed in January and we're not going to see them until September, that's a long time for them to think, oh, maybe it's not the right place, or maybe I should try something else. So it's been really important for us to demonstrate that academic staff members have a role in pre-enrollment activities, because I think we've both found over the years in our time, I've been in HE longer than Leanne, but it's definitely changed more recently, is that there's a kind of emerging narrative that until they're in the classroom, they're nothing to do with us. That, you know, it's marketing, or it's comms, or it's it's Central University Services job to do student recruitment, and our job is to teach them in the classroom. Whereas actually, students love talking to our team. They love talking to people who are passionate about education. They love, knowing that we're excited to welcome them. We ask them to do some tasks, and people said to us, oh, they won't do that, they'll turn up and they won't do that. They love doing it. They wanted something to feel like they were getting ready, and it was resource intensive, so we've reviewed it this year to think about what it might look like going forward. But there was something for us about demonstrating the role that the academic has in terms of managing that transition and supporting that transition, instead of what we see now is, you might get an email at the end of week 3 of the semester that says, these are your students that haven't engaged. Well, if they haven't engaged by week 3, they're not going to suddenly start engaging, are they? So we need to think about before we welcome them and how connected that belonging piece is so important, I think, for our students on whatever course they're studying. They don't really have a lot of identity attached to their faculty. I think if you said to students in our course, what faculty are you in? I'm not sure they would necessarily be able to answer that, but they know they're doing teacher training. They have a very strong discipline identity, and we see that with nursing, with paramedics, with other education courses, early childhood. They're very committed to their profession, and particularly for a university like ARU, that's really important, because we work really closely with employers, and lots of our university students are first in their family to go to university. It's a big investment, it's a big deal for them to go, so we have to make it valuable for them from the get-go.
Excellent. I appreciate that insight into what you're doing and sort of the background as to why. One of the things that you mentioned, and I know that's one of the areas that you researched, in particular, I was looking at one article that you wrote, Jenny, during the pandemic, and you mentioned something about sort of in this post-pandemic landscape in which we find ourselves. I know here in the United States, we, as whether you're a K-12 teacher or someone in higher education, it really did have a tremendous impact on education here in the United States, and you've alluded to that as well in terms of that. What were for you, both of you, what were those lessons learned, those takeaways that sort of forever, or at least in the short term, in the next few decades, do you think has sort of shifted or defined what you're doing, and was part of that equation you went through in terms of the pedagogy that you introduced and the frameworks that you established?
Yeah, I think for us, we're very conscious that our first cohort of students were the most affected by COVID in terms of their formal exams. So they had the most disrupted education, and we're seeing the next wave of students that come through will have had significant impact from their primary to secondary transition. Students that started in one year group and then changed schools without any of the traditional rituals around transition, saying goodbye, welcoming. They missed all of that. So I think one of the things that we've considered is about community. It's about how you create communities, and that's the research that you're alluding to there, Dean, was a piece of research that I did when I was involved in the first COVID-19 massive open online course, the MOOC that we did, which was aimed at healthcare professionals, and I was the education advisor on that. and we thought we'd maybe get 400 registrations, and we had 180,000 people register on the first week. So that is massive open online education. That is huge, and it was about people wanting to feel connected. They wanted to feel informed. It was the first COVID-19 MOOC that was from experts, and that was my work at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and they wanted credible sources. And I think what I've taken from that into my work now is this idea that we are living in a uncertain world. The relationship or the contract, the social contract that our trainees and our students have between themselves and positions of authority or organizations of authority doesn't exist in the same way. School was optional for lots of them. We support them with managing attendance, and we hear, well, no, last few years it's not really been a big thing if I didn't come to school. Everyone's had COVID, everyone's been ill. If you're not well, you can just stay at home. It's fine. You can just stay at home. And this idea that kind of effort is something that sometimes you've got to go in when you don't want to. Sometimes you've got to make the effort to do things, and actually studying online. Yeah, you can catch up, but it's not the same as being there. It's not the same as being in person. And we've had to work really hard, I think, to help people see the value of building that community together. And I think we do a good job of that. And I think we're very passionate about it. We love the benefits. We wouldn't be talking to you now at the time you're in and the time we're in if we didn't have, some of the innovations, and we try and make the most of that. But fundamentally, teaching is a relational process. These young people are going to be standing up in front of classrooms of children, and they have to be able to communicate. They have to be resilient. They have to be able to park some of their personal issues and be present for the children and young people that they're serving. And I think we feel very passionately that we have to recognise the challenges that they've been through, but also prepare them for the world of work, which is demanding in education. Educators, as you say, from any context, felt the challenges during COVID. And I think we've really wanted to make sure that we acknowledge that they've had that, while still recognising that we have professional standards. And part of those professional standards are making sure people are ready to do the job that they want to go in, because teaching is a great profession. Working in education is a privilege. We're all lucky to do it, but something about work has changed. Something about home has changed. There's a shift in how people see, could I do my degree on my phone in between caring responsibilities and a full-time job? No, not if you want a really, really high quality degree experience, unless the degree is being designed around that. So obviously we have great online distance providers. We do a great job at ARU, but it's a different thing that you're signing up to. And I think managing those expectations around what engagement looks like post-pandemic is really important, because it isn't straightforward. And I think we make a lot of assumptions as educators, and we have to recognise that it's not just COVID, it's a global economic crisis. The cost of living crisis is huge for our young people. We talk about it as the cost of learning crisis. Some of them are making a decision: do I come onto campus, or do I go to work to earn some money? That it's going to cost me to come onto campus, to park, to eat, all those things. Okay, that's a trade-off that I can't afford this week. So we have to really recognise that. And Leanne, in our first paper we wrote together, we talked about some of the challenges of the context, didn't we, in terms of the brittle landscape.
Yeah, and we found that most of our trainees, particularly, well, on all campuses, but they all live at home. For that, one of the reasons is that economic challenge of finding the university fees, the student loans, all that type of thing. Lots of them want to live at home, and they'll probably live at home for the first few years of their teaching career as well. And that has its challenges. Lots of them are commuting a long way, well over an hour to get to campus. And we do have a lot of teaching on this course compared to some other undergraduate degrees. They are on campus 3 or 4 days a week with us. When they're on placement, they'll be there for 5 days a week, full time, for the 8 weeks. So there is that challenge, I think, for the trainees. But they are very much prepared for that. From open day onwards, we talk to them about that, and about how important attendance is, both to them and their parents who come to the open days with them. So they are prepared for it, but it is a financial burden, I think, and a challenge.
and their parents being involved in the decision making is interesting as well. So we know that the data tells us that now, that is a significant they are an influencer. The parents are a part of the influencing. They're an influencer. They're people that they listen to in terms of where they want to go to university. We do open days. We have great open days. We've got one next week actually, and we'll have young people showing up with their mum, their dad, their nan, their sister. The whole family come along to see where they will be studying. Some of them where they will be living. It's a big family commitment for a young person to go to university, and I think we have to do our best to accommodate that within certain parameters. So I think that's another reflection for me post-pandemic, is that universities tied themselves up in knots during that time to accommodate and to adapt without much thought for the pedagogy and without much thought for the long-term impact of the decisions that they were making. So whether that be policies around extensions, whether it's about accessing support for well-being that is now really stretched to its limit at some of our universities, showing that there's a real genuine need there, but we've got to invest in it as organisations. But I think I'm always really clear, and this course has given us an opportunity to set out the expectations really clearly. This is how you train to be a teacher with us. If you can't do that, there are lots of other ways to train to be a teacher, and we can help you with that. But I think if we spend too much time trying to get into the realms of adapting everything for every possible eventuality. So, we could go down the road of having everything hybrid. We don't, because it's a very poor learning experience for both groups. But I think you have to be quite bold these days to set out your stall when it's very competitive for students, to say, actually, you can't make it up online. We're not going to record every lecture that we do. There are some red lines for us, and I think we have to work within accessibility parameters, and we recognize that. But fundamentally, if we're saying they've got to be ready to stand up in front of a class for 5 days a week for 8 hours a day, then we have to expect them in university. And that's not the same for all courses, but I think it's important that sometimes we take a step back to say, what are some of the things that we did in COVID that we can actually let go of now, because they're not serving us.
Right. Now, it sounds like there are a lot of similar experiences and discussions that have taken place in England that we have had here in the United States as well. A lot of similar types of reflections, if you will. Well, before we end, I want to offer both of you an opportunity to share any final thoughts or takeaways that you might have for our listeners.
Thanks, Dean. Well, I think we've really enjoyed working with our colleagues, particularly in the States, around learning from them in terms of transition, and recognizing that we don't have as many differences, particularly in the current landscape, that higher education is a fantastic opportunity for all of our students that we work with. But actually, the academic role, I think that's one of our takeaways from our transitions research that maybe we'd like to leave listeners with, is the academic role is evolving, and we need to evolve with it in order to be able to meet the needs of generations to come. And it's absolutely right and fair that university looks different than it did when we were at university. That's all part of how we get to work with young people and be part of their lives. And I think recognizing that, and not saying, well, we'll get chatbots or AI to answer all their questions that come in so that we don't have to deal with the emails. It's about human connection. That's the great privilege of HE. It's about personal relationships. It's about human connection. And we're really passionate, both Leanne and I, to make sure that we are developing courses, whether that's teacher training or other roles that we've had, where our students are able to prioritize human connection, because that's the great privilege of education. And I think that's what I would leave listeners with.
Thank you. Leanne?
Well, I don't know what to add to that. Thank you, Jenny. I think the personalisation aspect, and we work so we have course directors who have a cohort of trainees, and they build that personal relationship. And we have a personal development tutor role as well, where they have a group of trainees that they work with throughout the 3 years. And I think those personal relationships are absolutely crucial. And that face-to-face connection, and not losing that aspect at university, because that's what education is all about, those relationships, that human connection. And And I think we've worked hard on this course to keep that aspect within the course.
Yeah, and I think you do have to work hard at it. That's what we would say. It doesn't come easy. It's not young people's natural mode, but actually they love it. They're enriched by it, and if you can help everyone that you're working with to serve the work, that's what we always say. Our job is to serve the work. Then the benefits will come, and that's the same. It's not about us positioning our research or what we do as individuals. We're here to serve the work, and if we get to do great things like this podcast or go to Chicago as part of that, that's fantastic. But fundamentally, it's about working with students and helping them transform their lives, because that's what higher education is all about.
Excellent. Powerful messages. As we wrap up this episode, a huge thank you to our guests for sharing your insight, your experiences, and your expertise with our listeners. And I also want to thank our listeners for your continued support as we explore the international educational landscape and horizon. Until next time, this is Dean Cantu for the Future Insight Podcast, where tomorrow begins today. Take care and stay well.